I've really been a thorn in their side. And Vladimir Putin is a guy who really values his money. He values money more than human life. And he's come after me in a big way, threatened me with death, with kidnapping, issued 8 Interpol arrest warrants for me. I was actually even arrested in Madrid a couple years ago. Um, Extradition requests, lawsuits, just you name it, they were doing it. They're just basically a whole department of the Russian government trying to ruin my life. And in a certain way, I have a chance. I had a chance for the last 13 years to see firsthand what Putin is like as an adversary, and I'm watching this whole crisis unfold right now in Ukraine, and I kind of know what he's going to do next because he's done all this on a much smaller scale stuff to me. Well, it actually started earlier than the murder of Sergei Magnitsky. It started as early as the 2000s. I was living in Russia. I was running the largest foreign investment fund over there. And I noticed that all these companies that I was invested in, like Gazprom and Sberbank, they were stealing money out the back door like it was going out of style. And as an investor in these companies, it was bad for me if they were stealing all this money. And so I started to expose the corruption. I shared the investigations we did with the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal. And this ended up, as you can imagine, really angering Putin and his people. And in retaliation, they expelled me from the country in 2005, declared me a threat to national security, raided my offices in 2007. And that's when Sergei Magnitsky got involved. I hired him as my lawyer to help me figure out why they were raiding the offices. And he came back and said they raided your offices because they needed your documents to perpetrate a $230 million tax rebate fraud, where they were going to steal the tax money that my firm paid to the Russian government from the Russian government using my documents. Sergei discovered this crime. He exposed it. And instead of patting him on the back and saying what a good citizen he was for exposing this corruption scheme, the guys who were involved in it arrested him, put him in pretrial detention, where he was then tortured for 358 days and then killed at the age of 37 on November 16th, 2009. And on that day, it was, for me, it was the most heartbreaking life.
You were out of the country at the time. You had already been expelled from Russia.
Correct. So
Yeah.
I was in London. I got the call on the 17th of November, and it was the most horrifying, heartbreaking, life-changing call I could have ever gotten. I mean, basically, he was killed because he was my lawyer. And I made a vow in that moment to his memory, to his family, and to myself, that I was going to put aside all of my business activities and devote all of my time, energy, and resources in going after the people who killed him to make sure they face justice. And that's what I've been doing for the last 13 years. And we ended up getting some justice, which is this thing called the Magnitsky Act, which freezes assets and bans visas of people who commit these types of abuses in Russia and around the world. And of course, as you mentioned, the Magnitsky Act is now the template for all the sanctions that they're using on the oligarchs and on Putin and all these other characters. And so I've really been a thorn in their side. And Vladimir Putin is a guy who really values his money. He values money more than human life. And he's come after me in a big way, threatened me with death, with kidnapping, issued 8 Interpol arrest warrants for me. I was actually even arrested in Madrid a couple years ago. Um, Extradition requests, lawsuits, just you name it, they were doing it. They're just basically a whole department of the Russian government trying to ruin my life. And in a certain way, I have a chance. I had a chance for the last 13 years to see firsthand what Putin is like as an adversary, and I'm watching this whole crisis unfold right now in Ukraine, and I kind of know what he's going to do next because he's done all this on a much smaller scale stuff to me, and so
Can I
it's
can I just unpack some of the stuff you've been talking about? Because obviously this is fascinating. I mean, Bill, you are very, very well known in terms of this issue, and you've succeeded in getting the Magnitsky Act passed in 34 different countries. Can you just talk me through, as a layman, as it were, what do sanctions mean in real life? I know that sounds a ridiculous thing to say, but one reads, you pick up a newspaper or whatever, and you see so and so's yacht has been seized or their bank account has been frozen. If you're your average, I mean, I don't want to sound frivolous about what is a very, very serious issue, but if you're your average Russian oligarch subject to sanctions, how difficult is your life really made?
Your life is ruined. And so if you're there's no such thing as an average oligarch. There's not that many of them. There's only like 118 oligarchs in total. But if you're an oligarch, you're a billionaire. You keep your money all over the world. You have yachts, you have planes, you have villas, you have bank accounts in all different countries. And all of a sudden, when you get put on the sanctions list, and you don't even have to get put on all the sanctions lists, you can just get put on the US sanctions list, for example, or the UK sanctions list. And all of a sudden, every bank in the world will say, you know what, we don't want to have you as a client anymore. Your account is now either frozen or closed. No new bank will open an account for you. You can't use your credit cards anymore. Hell, even if you have Microsoft Word on your computer, and Microsoft will take your license away. You can't fly your private jet because the avionics are US and they don't work. And nobody will give you a visa anymore. So you're all of a sudden stuck in Russia, sentenced to life in Russia, and your life as a business person is over, and your access to your money is no longer there.
But that's what I want to get to, Bill. I mean, are you saying that some of these oligarchs are literally kind of effectively under house arrest, based in Moscow, unable to travel, able to heat their homes? What?
Yeah, I'm saying exactly that. I mean, in Moscow, they can probably heat their homes because they have ruble stashes or whatever. But somebody who has like Oleg Deripaska, he was
Yeah, exactly.
big Russian oligarch. He had a bunch of homes, and one in New York, and he found some British guy, his name is Bonham Carter, to help him like maintain the home. He somehow got him some money to maintain the home. And this guy, Bonham Carter, was just indicted by the US Department of Justice for evading sanctions. So not only can he not heat his home, but anyone who helped him out ends up in deep trouble with the US authorities, like, going to jail trouble.
But
And
we speak about this as being the way potentially to kind of unseat Putin, that if Putin ever goes, it will be because of a sort of coup by the people around him whose lives have been made effectively unlivable by sanctions. And sanctions have, in part, thanks to you, become a tool of warfare, kind of winning a war without a bullet being fired, as it were. I mean, why haven't, as it were, the oligarchs or the people subject to sanctions reacted against Putin? Is it just straightforward fear or what?
Yeah, so straightforward fear. So we should understand that the purpose of sanctioning the oligarchs is not to get them to rise up against Putin. They're not going to. These oligarchs are so scared you can't even imagine. I mean, you should see when Putin enters the room with a room full of oligarchs, they go from being these sort of hyper aggressive alpha male on steroid characters to these little whimpering school children. They're just completely scared of Putin. The reason we want to sanction the oligarchs is because the oligarchs are doing a service for Putin, which is they're holding his money for him. They're trustees and oligarchs and proxies for Vladimir Putin. Putin doesn't keep any money in his own name. He keeps the money in the name of these oligarchs. And so we want to basically deprive Putin of all the money that he's accumulated, both formally in the form of central bank reserves, which we've done, and informally in the form of oligarch assets, which he has, which belong to him and he has access to. And we've done that half that job. About 40 oligarchs are sanctioned among the top 118. And the purpose of this is just so that he doesn't have money. And we want to make sure that he doesn't have money to fight this war. And I'd say we've done a pretty good job of sanctioning Putin's savings by going after the central bank reserves and the oligarchs, but we're still not doing a very good job on sanctioning his income. He still gets all this money from the sale of oil. It used to be oil and gas.
And if he gets all that income, what can he do with it? Are we buying it in rubles and he can spend it in Russia?
We're I mean, I don't want to say we because I'm not involved in this, but people are paying him dollars for gas and oil. And he takes that money and then he goes and gives it to the Iranians to buy drones to kill Ukrainians and bomb their power plants so they freeze in the winter, and giving money to North Koreans so that he gets shells and artillery and missiles from the Koreans because he needs more equipment for all this stuff. And so, we need to make sure he doesn't have that money.
And how do you stop that? I mean, the countries that are buying oil off Putin are either not our friends or are people who countries that say we simply can't at this stage wean ourselves off Russian oil. So how on earth do you stop it?
Well, it's really easy. I think if you look at who's involved, who's on our side of the barricades right now, we have so you have the UK, the US, Canada, the European Union,
Yeah,
Australia, Japan, South Korea.
yeah,
Who are all these people? These are the most important economies of the world.
yes,
It's like 70% of the GDP of
yeah,
the
but they're
world.
not China and they're not
Okay,
India.
right, exactly. So you have the most important economies of the world locking arms and saying now we have an opportunity, and I'm not sure if this would work with China, but it would certainly work with Turkey or the United Arab Emirates to say, hey, listen, guys, you want to do business with Russia? You think Russia is such an important country? We're all for it. Go for it. But you're not going to do any more business with us.
But it hasn't worked with Saudi, for example.
No, I think it would work with anybody. We haven't done it. We haven't locked arms and said, make a choice, Russia or us. Because, Russia is 2% of world GDP. We're 70%. You choose.
And have you had the chance to ask world leaders? Have you had a chance to put this proposal to them? Because surely they would just turn around to you and say, we can't stop doing business with the Middle East, for example.
Well, I mean, I've had conversations with officials in a lot of different countries, and I'm not, these broad brush things that I'm telling you right now aren't the proposals I'm making. But for example, with the U.S. government, I've told them very specifically, if it's upsetting you that the Turks are helping the Russians evade sanctions, and we're seeing all these yachts parked there, why don't you just add to the sanctions list the marinas in Turkey that are doing business with the Russian oligarchs, so that all of a sudden all their accounts are frozen like everybody else's. I guarantee you, all you have to do is sanction one marina, and the Russians won't be able to park their yachts anymore in Turkey.
What do we plan to do with the stuff that we sanctioned? I mean, are we going to sell the yachts?
Well, there are two different questions: freezing assets so the Russians don't have access to them, and seizing assets so the proceeds can be used for Ukraine. At the moment, we have all legislation in place to freeze the assets. At the moment, we don't have legislation in place to seize the assets. And so one of the most important things going forward is as our economies struggle through this awful cost of living crisis and all this recession talk that we're starting to see accumulate, and people say, well, we don't want to dig into our pockets anymore for Ukraine, which I've heard. I mean, just today, a group of 30 Democrats in America have said,
let's have a peace plan.
Peace plan, give Putin what he wants. And same thing from Kevin McCarthy, who may very well become the Speaker of the House of Representatives, saying we don't want a blank check for Ukraine. Well, there's one easy way to solve this, which is let the Russians pay for Ukraine. We have $350 billion of central bank reserves already frozen in our custody that belongs to the Russian government. Let's use that money to pay for the Ukraine's defense.
So, Bill, you've devoted 13 years of your life to this campaign, and in fact, you've been a prophet because you were campaigning against Putin 13 years ago, and here we are, as it were, at the end game of where Putin's been going. Do you ever have regrets about taking this path before, obviously, your colleague was murdered, but thinking, if only I'd walked away in 2007 and 8 and just got on with my life?
Well, I don't think I could have ever walked away at that point. I do have regrets, but my main regret is that I went to Russia in the first place. I went to Russia, in some glassy-eyed, youthful optimism, thinking that it was going to become a democratic country where we could all do business. And I graduated from Stanford Business School in California. I could have stayed in California and not had all these people trying to murder me. But once I got involved in this thing, once I moved to Russia and I started a business and started to encounter all this stuff, I don't really regret any action I've taken since then. I mean, I certainly, once Sergei Magnitsky was murdered, I could never have done anything differently. And I just don't see how, nothing ever ends well for anyone involved with Putin. If you just look at the history of anybody who's got a Russian business, anyone who's done anything over there, it never ended well.
And just on an optimistic note, you are a One Young World ambassador, and One Young World is a forum for young leaders across the world. So tell us about your work with them, because that is at least about looking to a better, brighter future, I hope.
Well, the thing about it is that, so we see all these terrible dictators and, people like the Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin and Erdogan in Turkey and so on. and it's hard to have an optimistic view. But then you go to this One Young World is this organization of these incredible young leaders, and I'm talking about people in their 20s, and sometimes from these countries who are just bravely, standing up with new ideas. And the only way that we're ever going to have any change in these countries, in all these terrible places, is if somebody comes in and provides some leadership, provides some decency, and the young people are our only hope in this situation. And I'll do everything I can to engage with young people, to encourage them to be on the right track, to assist them, to mentor them, because that's the only hope we have in this world where these cynical old men are ruining it for everybody.
And what kind of age are the people you're kind of mentoring? And
These are all people in their 20s, the 20s, young, really young people, sometimes even younger than that, who are standing up to dictators, who are fighting for democracy in all sorts of different countries. And every time I meet one of these young people, and it's just, it makes me feel like, I kind of can sigh a sigh of relief to know that there's something better on the horizon. It doesn't have to always be this way.